The air in the makeshift clinic smelled of iodine and damp earth, a familiar scent to Emily Dubois. It was late May 1944, and the silence in her small Norman town was heavier than any roar of artillery. For months, whispers of the coming invasion had swirled through the village like dust on the wind, but the reality of it felt 1,000,000 miles away. Emily, only 23, moved with the efficiency of a much older woman, her hands expertly bandaging the arm of a farmer who had been injured by a stray shell. Her field hospital was a converted barn on the outskirts of Sainte-Mère-Église. The sunlight streaming through a broken window illuminated the worn faces of the wounded, a grim tableau of quiet suffering. Dr. Henri Laurent, a man whose greying hair belied his ceaseless energy, moved between the cots, his face a mask of weary concentration. He was Emily's anchor in this storm. "Another one," he said, nodding towards a new arrival carried in by 2 local men. "He stepped on a landmine while checking his fields. It's getting worse, Emily. The Germans are mining everything." Emily knelt beside the new patient, her heart sinking. The man's leg was severely damaged. She worked quickly, her mind compartmentalizing the horror. She was a professional, a nurse. Her job was to fix, to mend, to heal. She could not afford the luxury of emotion, but as the sun began to set, a low, distant hum resonated through the floorboards. It was not a single sound, but a growing, guttural chorus that made the very air vibrate. Naval gunfire. The whispering had stopped. The waiting was over. The dawn of June 6th broke not with a rooster's crow, but with the earth-shaking thunder of 1,000 guns. Emily stood at the barn door, watching as paratroopers descended from the sky, a surreal, silent snowfall of men. Soon after, the first wave of wounded arrived, a human tide of unimaginable pain and chaos. The field hospital, already strained, was now a maelstrom of activity. Dr. Laurent barked orders, his voice a steadying force against the crescendo of screams and cries. "Get him on that cot! Tourniquet now! Emily, we need more bandages, stat!" Emily moved like a phantom, her mind a whirlwind of priorities. A young American soldier with a shattered arm, a German infantryman with a chest wound, a French boy caught in the crossfire. Their nationalities were irrelevant. They were all simply casualties, and her duty was to all of them. The familiar scent of iodine was now mixed with gunpowder, blood, and sweat. For hours they worked without rest, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Emily's hands, once steady, now trembled with fatigue. She was running on pure adrenaline and desperation. The supplies were dwindling at an alarming rate. "We're almost out of morphine," she heard Dr. Laurent say, his voice strained, "and a serious shortage of sterile gauze. I don't know how long we can keep this up." The weight of the world pressed down on her, not a metaphorical burden, but the very real weight of human lives hanging in the balance. The second night of the invasion brought no respite. The field hospital was now a grim dormitory for the living, the dying, and the dead. The cries of the wounded had become a monotonous, tragic symphony. Dr. Laurent, his face streaked with dirt and blood, made a decision. "We can't sustain this. We're out of almost everything. Emily, I need you and Jean-Luc to go into town. The pharmacy in the square. I remember the pharmacist, Monsieur Dubois. He was a meticulous man. He might have a hidden stash of supplies." The mission was fraught with peril. Sainte-Mère-Église was now a patchwork of American and German lines, and the fighting was far from over. The main roads were littered with the wreckage of tanks and vehicles. Emily knew the back alleys and hidden pathways like the back of her hand, but navigating them now would be like walking through a minefield. With Jean-Luc, a brave but nervous local man, she set out under the cloak of darkness. The town was a ghost of its former self. Shells had torn through the cobblestone streets, leaving craters and piles of rubble. The smell of smoke and decay hung heavy in the air. A German patrol truck rumbled by in the distance, its headlights cutting through the night. Emily pulled Jean-Luc behind a crumbling wall, their hearts pounding in unison. The danger was palpable, an electric current that made her skin crawl. But the image of the wounded soldiers lying helpless back at the barn, their fate sealed by a lack of medicine, pushed her forward. They reached the square, a surreal landscape of destroyed buildings and abandoned military gear. The pharmacy stood remarkably, with most of its structure intact, though its windows were shattered. Emily and Jean-Luc slipped inside, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. The air was thick with dust and the smell of chemicals. Emily found M. Dubois' hidden stash, a locked closet behind a large counter. Inside, she found a treasure trove of gauze, bandages, and crucial morphine vials. As they were carefully packing the supplies, a noise from the front of the store froze them. The clink of a rifle on the floor, the guttural sound of German. They were trapped. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Jean-Luc, her eyes wide with terror. They scrambled for a hiding spot, ducking behind a collapsed shelf. 3 German soldiers entered, their flashlights sweeping the room. They weren't looking for people, just looting. They grabbed a few items and began to leave, but one of them spotted the open closet. "Was ist das?" he said, his voice hard. Just then, a loud explosion from a distant street shook the building, and the Germans, startled, ran out to investigate, leaving the pair of them hidden. Emily and Jean-Luc used the moment to their advantage. Grabbing what they could, they bolted for the back door and disappeared into the night, the weight of the precious supplies a comforting burden on their shoulders. We're only a third of the way through this incredible story, and the real mission is about to begin. If you're hooked, make sure you don't miss a second of Emily's journey. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified when the next video in this series drops. Back at the field hospital, the supplies from the pharmacy were a godsend, but the influx of wounded soldiers continued relentlessly. Emily, exhausted but re-energized, worked tirelessly. It was during a rare moment of calm that she met Corporal Jacques Benoit, a French resistance fighter with a severe leg wound. He lay on a cot, his eyes scanning the barn, taking in every detail with a piercing intensity. He called to her as she passed. "You're the nurse who went into town, yes?" "I heard whispers." His voice was hoarse. Emily nodded, her guard up. "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing more than that," he said, his gaze unwavering. "We have a problem, a mission no one has survived. A unit of American paratroopers were ambushed near the woods of Carentan. They're pinned down in an old farmhouse. Several are badly wounded. We tried to get a team to them, but the Germans have the area locked down. The casualties were high." Emily's blood ran cold. Carentan was a major German stronghold. It was a suicide mission. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Because they need a medic, and you're the only one I know of with the guts and the knowledge to make it. Their communication is cut off. They'll die of their wounds if we don't get someone to them within the day. The generals have written them off. They can't spare the men, not for a mission with a 0% chance of success. But we can." He paused, his eyes pleading. "It's a mission where even generals failed to save the wounded on D-Day." Dr. Laurent, his face etched with concern, was furious. "You can't be serious, Emily. This is insanity. Carentan is a meat grinder. I've heard the reports. You're a nurse, not a soldier." "They'll die, Henri," Emily said, her voice firm. "They have no one else. Jacques says they're trapped. We have the supplies. I have the skills. I have to try. And if you don't come back, what happens to the men here? To me?" he pleaded. A heavy silence filled the barn. Emily knew he was right. Her place was here. But the image of those isolated, wounded men haunted her. The mission was against all logic, all reason. It was an act of pure, desperate faith. "Jacques has a guide," she said, her voice full of a resolve she didn't know she possessed. "He knows a way through the back roads, a hidden path. I'm going. She packed a small bag with what little she could spare, a few vials of morphine, sterile needles, gauze, and a single flashlight. She said a brief goodbye to Dr. Laurent, a hug that conveyed a lifetime of unspoken fears. He didn't say another word, but the look in his eyes was a mixture of resignation and a heartbreaking pride. As she left, Emily took one last look at the field hospital, a sanctuary of sorts in a world gone mad, before stepping out into the unknown. Emily's guide was a young resistance member named Louis, a boy no older than 17, with an old man's eyes. They moved through the Norman countryside, a landscape of broken hedgerows and scarred fields. The air was thick with the stench of death and gunpowder. They had to be silent, to be invisible. The journey was a constant, nerve-wracking exercise in avoidance, every shadow a potential threat, every distant sound a source of terror. They saw things that would haunt Emily forever. The wreckage of a tank, its crew trapped inside, a young German soldier, no older than Louis, lying dead in a ditch, the stillness of a field of cows, torn apart by artillery. The war was no longer a distant thunder. It was a physical, grotesque presence. Finally, they reached the farmhouse. It was a crumbling stone building, a few trees providing what little cover they could. Louis pointed to a small window, barely visible from their position. "They are in the cellar. We have to be quick. Germans patrol this area constantly." Emily took a deep breath, her heart a frantic drum. She pushed aside the fear, reminding herself that her hands had a purpose, her mind a job to do. With Louis covering her, she scrambled towards the farmhouse, the sound of her own ragged breathing the only thing she could hear. She found a small hidden entrance and slipped inside, descending into the cool, dark cellar. The sight that greeted her was worse than she had imagined. Several men lay wounded, their faces pale and drawn, their breathing shallow. One of them, a young American private, was fading fast. The mission is far from over. Emily has reached the trapped soldiers, but the biggest challenges and the most difficult choices are still ahead. Can she save them? Find out in the final chapters of this incredible story. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the end of Emily's journey. The cellar was a field hospital in miniature, but it was nothing more than a damp, earthen hole. A single, flickering candle cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating the gaunt, sweat-soaked faces of the wounded men. The air was thick with the smells of mildew, blood, and a desperate fear that hung heavy like the humidity. Emily, with her small bag of supplies and her vast experience, moved with a quiet, furious intensity. The youngest of the Americans, Private Leo Harrison, was in the worst condition. His leg was a mangled mess of flesh and shattered bone, a grotesque testament to the power of shrapnel. He was delirious, his lips moving soundlessly as he whispered a name, "Maman, Maman." His friends, the few who were still conscious, had given up hope. "We thought you were a ghost," one of the men said, a sergeant with a broken arm and a look of profound exhaustion. "We thought nobody was coming." Emily's heart ached, but she pushed the emotion down. She had to make a terrible choice. To save Leo, she would need to perform a makeshift amputation. The grim reality of the cellar, the lack of proper tools, and the constant danger of their location made the decision almost impossible. She didn't have enough morphine for the full procedure, and the infection was spreading rapidly, a dark tide threatening to consume his life. She had to act now, or he would be gone by morning. She spoke to the sergeant, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "I need your help. Hold him down. I need a clean shirt, anything to create a tourniquet." With the other men's help, she prepared for the surgery. Emily was a nurse, not a surgeon, but the line between the two had blurred long ago. She improvised with a clean knife and a steady resolve, pouring all her courage into her hands. The room filled with the American's agonized scream, a raw, primal sound that tore at her soul. It was the most brutal, desperate thing she had ever done, but it was their only chance. Hours passed in an eternity of focus, her mind a fortress against the horrific reality. She stitched the wound, applied the last of her gauze, and held the trembling boy's hand. The weight of a young man's life rested entirely on her shoulders, and she refused to let it fall. In the aftermath of the harrowing surgery, a fragile sense of hope bloomed in the cellar. The men, though weak and in pain, watched Emily with a new kind of reverence. Private Harrison, pale and unresponsive, had at least stopped his feverish babbling. He was alive. The challenge now was to get them back to the main hospital, a journey that seemed impossible. Corporal Benoit's intelligence proved invaluable. He had arranged for a small group of resistance fighters to meet them at a rendezvous point near the woods. But the path to that point was a gauntlet of enemy patrols and treacherous terrain. They moved at a snail's pace. Emily and the able-bodied soldiers, supported by Louis, the young guide, carried the wounded on makeshift stretchers fashioned from coats and branches. Every few feet was a struggle, the sharp stones and broken ground jarring the injured men and eliciting pained groans. Emily walked alongside them, her eyes constantly scanning the tree line, her ears strained for any sign of German patrols. The air crackled with a tension that was almost as real as the shrapnel in the ground. The men, their faces gaunt, looked to her for guidance, for hope. She was no longer just a nurse. She was their lifeline, a beacon in the darkness. They were nearing the rendezvous point when they saw them, a German patrol coming down the road ahead. They had been spotted. The men froze, their hearts hammering. Just then, like avenging spirits, the resistance fighters, true to their word, emerged from the woods. A small, ragtag group of farmers and young men, they opened fire, their antique rifles cracking against the sharper reports of the Germans' machine guns. A brief, furious skirmish erupted, a chaotic symphony of bullets and shouts. The resistance fighters created a diversion, drawing the enemy's attention and giving Emily and the soldiers a chance to escape. They fled, half carrying, half dragging their wounded comrades, and made it to the rendezvous point just as the sun began its ascent. There, waiting like a miraculous apparition, was a small truck, its engine rumbling softly. They arrived back at the barn as dawn broke, a ragged procession of wounded men and an exhausted nurse. Emily's muscles ached, her clothes were caked in mud and blood, and her eyes burned with exhaustion, but she was back. Dr. Laurent was standing at the entrance, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. He saw Emily, a ghost of her former self, and a look of profound emotion crossed his face. He simply walked to her, wrapped her in a fierce, protective hug, and said nothing. His silence was 1,000 words, an unspoken testament to her courage and his gratitude. The wounded soldiers, including Private Harrison, were quickly moved inside. Their desperate journey was over. Emily, after ensuring that Leo was stable and finally resting peacefully, allowed herself a moment of quiet. She walked outside, the morning air cool on her face, and sat on the steps. She watched the sun rise over the liberated but still war-torn countryside. The sky was a brilliant, hopeful blue, and the distant sound of combat had finally faded to a whisper. The familiar scent of iodine and damp earth was a welcome comfort. The war was far from over. Carentan was still a contested battlefield, and the fighting for France would continue for months. But at this moment, sitting on the steps of a makeshift hospital, Emily felt a profound change within herself. She had faced a mission that was deemed impossible, a mission where even generals had failed, and she had returned not as a victor, but as a testament to the unyielding power of courage and compassion. She had not only saved the lives of others, she had found a resilience within herself she never knew she had. The girl who started this journey was gone, replaced by a woman who had seen the worst of humanity and found the best of herself. Thank you for watching Emily's incredible story. Her courage and the bravery of all those who fought for freedom deserves to be remembered. If this story moved you, please hit the subscribe button to be part of our community and get notified about more powerful, real-life dramas.